Hi, this is Peter Hastings. I'm the writer and director of Dogman, and I'm going to take you through the movie and talk about how we made it, why we made it, what was fun, what was crazy, and a lot of insider information on it. You know, Dave Pilkey, who is the author of the Dogman books, is always really interested in inspiring people, and hopefully listening to the commentary about how we made this movie will be the same for you. The first thing I want to talk about is really the look of this movie and the style of it. And it really comes out of what the books are like. So it's a tremendously popular book series. And the idea is that they are written by two 10-year-olds, George Beard and Harold Hutchins, who are from the Captain Underpants books. And the style is like two 10-year-olds did it. It's very simple. It is innocent. It just has this charm to it, which is not only the way the kids supposedly drew it, but it's really a very important part of the tone of the whole series. And I think when you take a book and you want to bring it into a movie, one of the really tricky things is not just telling the story, but discovering what is the spirit of that book series. What's the spirit of it? What's the tone of it? What is the vibe of it? Because that's really why people like it. It's like, what do you really like about this? And, you know, the story's funny, but there's a charm and an innocence and stuff to this book series that we really wanted to maintain. And so we kept the very simple character design. We kept the crooked lines. We kept the buildings that don't have all the windows, all this sort of stuff to make what we called high-end handmade. So you can see, when you look at this movie, you can see brush strokes, you can see pencil things, you see crooked lines, you see all these really what they are imperfections. And the hand of the artist is very present. Yet at the same time, we're rendering it out in CG, and it has a type of slickness all about it. But really wanted to make this movie very tactile, like you could just grab it, you know. And it's really part of the charm of the whole thing. The characters are also really simple. You know, a lot of times in a CG movie, you have a character who is really as articulate in their face muscles and their articulation, just like a human. And you can see here, these are really simple designs. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to figure out how to animate everything, but we really wanted to maintain that thing. Again, the whole aesthetic was high-end handmade. So this part that we're watching right now is the origin story of Dogman. And it's in the beginning of almost every book where Officer Knight and Greg the dog get into trouble and there's an explosion, et cetera, that we're about to see. And, you know, there's always a question when you tell people the story that there is a dog's head sewed onto a man's body, people are like, that's crazy. What kind of movie is this? But when it's contained inside this innocence and this charm, and really the idea of like two 10-year-olds having fun, it's just silly and fun and ridiculous. And then, you know, when you finally see Dogman, when he comes out of the hospital later, there's just kind of an explosion of joy. So the whole thing is really couched in really the spirit of fun. This building right here, the abandoned expendable warehouse, is a very Pilkey-esque kind of thing of labeling something, not just calling it an abandoned expendable warehouse, but putting a gigantic sign on it that says that as well. So I'll just kind of be hitting the cast too as we go along. This is Pete Davidson, who is playing Petey, the world's most evilest cat. And Pete ended up being such a great choice for this part. I think some people were surprised because his voice was like maybe a little, you know, expecting somebody to come in all whiny and like, hey, I hate you, you know, but Pete has this great, rich voice. And he was able to play something really important in this movie, which is to be a tough guy and to also be vulnerable at the same time. So, yeah, bad news about to happen for these two guys. It says oops there. By the way, it says oops on that thing. There are so many Easter eggs in this movie of little visual things they're insane. They are just hidden text things everywhere. There are little characters from the other books that are hidden inside the whole thing. Ranuma Panthenki playing the doctor and Maggie Wheeler playing this nurse. One of the great things that I was really able to do, I've worked in animation for a long time. I know lots and lots of voice actors and other actors, and it was really fun to bring them in to do these small parts. Again, look for the funny jokes, for the visuals. And this is Isla Fisher, who is playing Sarah Hadoff, the world's greatest reporter, as it says right there. Isla was so perfect for this. You know, it's funny, in the books, this character is referenced as being Australian like once in text, like deep into the book series. And we were like, well, I don't know if that's so important. But Dave was like, oh, no, you need an Australian. She has to be Australian. And then we found Isla, who just had so much fun doing it. She's really funny, and she was just perfect for the part. And that was our funny little Dogman introduction. This gag right here where Sarah smashes the chief with the microphone is something I've been wanting to do for a really long time. And I just kept saying, we got to turn that up. We got to turn that up. And the chief, well, the chief has some great stuff coming up. The chief is being played by Lil Rel Howery. And I've seen him in film and was just really attracted to his style. Another person who has this amazing ability to flip from crazy mad to crazy sad to loving to fun. And there's just some scenes coming up really soon where he does it, like, for example, right here. Again, don't forget to check out all the newspapers and the signage and all the little stuff that's happening in here. That's Sarah's dog, Zuzu, who is present in all the books and here. And we made sure that we weren't going to give Zuzu any chocolate donuts out there on the table. And, you know, kind of going back to the style again, if you look at the lamp there and the table and all that stuff, it looks like it was painted by hand. They're like brush strokes and all that stuff. And then one of the kind of fancy things we did is that we gave it the reflection of like the real material. So it's painted to look like brass, but then the reflection that hits it is like real metal. Even the doorknob, when she walks out here, you can see that door handle. It's reflecting like a real brass handle would. So it's not just existing in a 2D thing. So part of the story challenge here in Dogman is that the books aren't about Dogman that much. It's kind of like the world of Dogman, Dogman's world. And so when I got into the story, it was really about how to get Dogman a little more centered in the story. And part of it was what happens when you become a half man, half dog. And it turns out that he sort of lost his old life. And this gives him some drive through the movie to find a new family, basically. So that's kind of his goal, that he sort of lost his family here, and is he going to find one? Sometimes if I'm working on a story, I kind of think of it as a question and an answer. And the question is, will I find a family? And the answer in this movie is yes, but not the one you expected. This is Melissa Villaseñor, who's a Saturday Night Live veteran and somebody who I've also worked with in animation. She came in to do this part. She was great. This is part of the storytelling thing about giving a character a kind of a putting them in a hole a little bit so they have somewhere to go. And also, you know, emotion is just so tremendously important when you're telling a story, because we may be distracted by all the bells and whistles and robots and crazy stuff, but it's really the emotion that hooks us in to a story. The tennis ball in this thing had many, many iterations in terms of, does he keep it? Does he lose it? Does someone else find it? Does it end up on the leg of somebody's walker? You know, what happens to it? there was a long sequence here where he goes down into the sewer and he gets carried by a bird and he falls through a tree and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you just go like, don't need all that stuff. This is Millie, and this is played by Lunell. And I wrote this funny little rant for her in the car. And when we watched it later, it was just kind of so much fun that I wrote another one for her that she does later in the movie. I want to make sure I'm giving credit to people. So when I go back to talk about the look of this movie, one of the very first people who was on the movie was our production designer, Nate Ragg. Nate has done lots of stuff at DreamWorks and other studios, and he's just such a great professional. And when I started the movie, it was really important that I was able to describe what I wanted it to feel like. And I came up with these kind of catchphrases or sort of a mission statement for the movie. And the first one was, and they're really all come out of Dave Pilkey's work as well. The first one was intelligently silly. I wanted the movie to be intelligently silly. I wanted it to be ridiculous and also cool, but at the same time, ridiculously cool. I wanted it to be sophisticated but innocent, sophisticatedly innocent, and surprisingly emotional. So those things, particularly the intelligently silly, were really things that I could describe to everybody on the crew. And then they were able to do their best work knowing what it was supposed to feel like. And that's what makes it all kind of come together. So if I can describe the tone and the style in the beginning, they can go crazy, right? I can have the best people in the world and I go, you're amazing, just do whatever you want, right? I can't wait to see it. And then everybody brings it back and it doesn't fit together because it's missing that sort of continuity of tone. So that was really, really important. And then after Nate helped me pitching the movie to Dave Pilkey. And then when we got going, producer Karen Foster came on, who I'd worked with previously. And, we started to assemble the crew. Just to give you a little rundown on how these things work, you write a script and then you give it to the storyboard artist. Anthony Zierhut is our head of story. And then you have a crew of storyboard artists and they begin to draw the movie kind of in a comic book style. And then you take it and you give it to the editor, our editor, Hoppy Hopkins, who I had worked with previously on a Captain Underpants TV series. He comes in and he starts to put all the drawings in order. And you really just start making the movie right away. It's black and white drawings, and you do that. And it's super fun. The storyboard crew, it's really interesting because the storyboard crew is kind of like musicians in a way. Like you've got a band, and it's like, oh, that guy's a great lead guitarist, and this person's a really good drummer, and this person is a piano player. They all have their different strengths that they bring to storyboarding the movie. So sometimes you get to, oh, this is an emotional scene. This would be great for this person, and this action sequence would be great and this crazy thing would be great for this person. And it's kind of interesting in CG animation, you have a lot of leeway in terms of what your storyboards look like because you're really referencing, this is what I want to have happen, but the characters themselves, when you build a character, it's like a puppet. And so then you're just saying, this is what I want the puppet to do. In 2D animation, you're actually taking those drawings and refining them, and that becomes the animation. So it needs to be much more specific. And in CG, there's much more leeway for artists to have different styles as long as they're kind of communicating what it is that they're doing. That's Big Jim at Catch Ale, who is played by our editor, Hoppy Hopkins. And the mayor, who is hilarious, Sherry O'Terry, another Saturday Night Live veteran. She's just so good at yelling, and she just came in and really, really cracked us up. This is probably the most frantic part of the entire movie, maybe. The Arrest Petey montage. So this montage starts out with the vacuum cleaner, which is actually in the very first Dogman book, and the rest of it I made up because I have to sort of condense some things. There's some things that'll happen that need to, a setup, but I'm not going to tell you the whole story, so I'm pulling things from earlier books. This particular story is primarily from the third book, A Tale of Two Kitties. And I chose that one because I think it's where the Dogman series really becomes its own. The first book is kind of feels like an offshoot of Captain Underpants, and the second one is more Dogman. And then the third one introduces new characters and new situations. And I think it kind of really locked in at that time. So it was really the best story to work on. But again, I had to make up a lot of new stuff because the movie just has different storytelling needs than a book does. So this is Sherry coming in here as the mayor and giving the what for. Again, all the brushstrokes, all the styling, all the lighting just looks fantastic. Unlike a live action movie where, you light the set before the actors even walk in animation, the lighting is really the last thing that happens. And it's an incredible change to the picture. It just makes it look absolutely fantastic. This bit here, this is a little interesting thing for me. I love this gag, and it's total nonsense. And sometimes when I'm writing, I can struggle to figure something out. And other times I just go like, oh, she gives him a card and says, call this guy that says life's not fair. Just no thought in it at all. It just pops into my head. And then now, years later, we're watching it in the movie. But of course, there are also many things that pop in your head that are completely disposable. And now you can see how really depressed Dogman is because he refuses this donut. The score of this movie is done by Tom Howe. This cue here and a bunch of other ones are just really some of my favorites. I love all the really sad cues. And I think also because it's just sort of unexpected maybe in this movie that there would even be sad cues or sad moments. But I think it just makes it all so much richer and interesting. In general, I don't really even think about, you would probably say this is a kid's movie. I never think about that. And I don't think about it, oh, it's a kid's movie that adults will like, or it's an adult movie that kids will like. I just think of it as like, for people. And one of the people that I really want to have like it is me. And so it's really making something that I just think is really strong and fun and has a lot of universal kind of stuff. This bit here where Dogman howls along with this song, it was because I was trying to answer the question of like, can I have a lead character who doesn't talk at all? He's not going to do any talking. What do we do? And then I thought, well, what if he plays records and he lip syncs records? And then we started doing this and we're sort of like, he should howl with it. And I go like, well, I know that works, but what if he lip syncs it? And then when we did the howls, it was just so great. Honestly, when I look at it now, I go like, it's such a weird moment and I love it. The voice of Dogman is provided by me, Peter Hastings. And the way that came about is when you're working on the film, you do what we call scratch voices. So, myself, other people on the crew, you invite people in, and they do the voices before you've cast the movie, before you have actors in, when you need to just kind of pick stuff up. And I was doing the Dogman voice. And then, we asked a bunch of actors and we're like, hey, do you want to play the lead character in this movie? And they're like, really? That sounds interesting. And then we say, like, he doesn't talk. It's like, okay, maybe not. You know what? There are voice actors who do incredible dog sounds, like absolutely perfect. But there was a thing about the way that I was doing it that I go like, well, this actually makes sense. It's like, because he's half man, half dog. He's not 100% dog. Whose vocal cords does he actually have? You can all debate that, but anyway, it's me. The character who just left, the character whose name is Butler, although her name is never said in the movie, is played by Poppy Lou. And in the books, that's a guy. It's kind of an old guy. And I wanted to make sure that we had more female characters. So I kind of changed it out and gave her an attitude. I love her design. It's so much fun. Loved using this song in this moment. You see, even there in that split screen, that's like our high-end handmade, just keeping that alive all the time. This bit here with the board is basically 80% of the second book, presented in like 12 seconds. So it's this one long run-on sentence that is the backstory of Flippy the fish. So Flippy is like the main part of that story, and it's kind of so fast, and you go through it. If you don't know that book, you're not going to get that. It's just going to fly by. But if you know the book, it's going to be this wonderful little moment of seeing it happen incredibly fast. Again, also that sort of thing with the text appearing on screen is just coming out of that exact same style, the Pilkey style. This is Lorraine Newman, known, of course, as an original cast member from Saturday Night Live, who also is a voice actor and somebody that I've worked with a lot. This, again, another nonsense beat. It's like you think she's going to show you somebody building a robot, and instead they're just doing that dance, as the kids do. And the adults do that as well, as a matter of fact. So it's super fun to have Pete in doing all this kind of stuff. I go through a thing a lot of time with voice actors where they kind of come in and they go, oh, what did I sign up for? And then in a pretty short amount of time, they go like, oh, this is fun. And then when they really like it is when they see their voice animated. And then they go like, oh, this is cool. Sarah's cameraman is Seamus, played by Billy Boyd, and he was terrific. So he's her Scottish cameraman. And here's a little inside information. My middle name is Livingston, which is a Scottish name, and the shirt that he is wearing is Livingston plaid. So it had been done in some different colors, and then I asked the art crew to modify that to be Livingston plaid. A lot of these little side jokes and everywhere are also done by Chris Zierhut, who is our art director under NARAG. And he just went to town on all this stuff. The whole art department was really, really tremendous. And one of the really fun things about this movie is that a lot of the development art that was done, the visual development art, is very similar to what ended up in the movie. A lot of times you see visual development art and it's like, oh, that's amazing. But it's very impressionistic and it doesn't look like the movie. But we kept a lot of that stuff in. So just to go back to the process, once the editor has it in his editing machine, the art department is also developing the look and feel of the movie. And then these two things come together in what we call layout. And layout is really kind of like, where does the camera go? How does the camera move? It's really sort of cinematography. It's putting the characters in the scene using the earliest stages of the CG models and sets. And Scott Cullen is our head of layout and cinematographer. So figuring out all this stuff, like how the camera's moving, all this stuff you're looking at right here, the blocking of characters, and you're modifying what was in the storyboards to do that. And Scott and his team did really, really excellent job. And then, once you have the sort of character designs and, this layout, then you start to animate the movie. John Hill was our head of animation, head of character animation, or HOCA as it's referred to. And he did a fantastic job. So there were a lot of things to figure out with these characters because the character designs are very simple and they don't have a lot of controls, as you call them, to show their emotion. So it's a challenge for an animator. Plus things like, if you watch Dogman's ears, they go all over the place. Sometimes they're on both sides. Sometimes they're on one side. They flip all around, and you got to figure that stuff out. Sometimes the arms are attached in different places. And so there's a real high level of creativity to figure out basically how not to notice those things. How do you animate them in a way that just feels natural and flows? If you watch Dogman's ears in the movie, see now it's hanging down on one side. Sometimes there's two sticking out in another way, and they're all over the place. So I think John and also the team at Jellyfish Pictures, which did most of the animation in the movie, they did a tremendous job. And the thing that I love about it is sometimes I feel like in CG animation, it's so good that you don't notice it. It's so good that you don't even appreciate the idea that somebody made that thing move so well. If you watch an old 2D piece of animation, it's like, oh my gosh, drawings, they're moving, like moving drawings. You're aware of what the artist is doing. In a lot of CG, it's so good, you're not aware of it at all at the skill level. And I think in a way, our characters are so simple that you're drawn back into that a little bit to see how, the animators are making these very simple characters expressive. The other thing about our characters too is if you know the books and if you like the books, they just look like the books came to life. And that was really one of our goals too. It's like, I don't want to reimagine the books. I want to expand on the books and make them come to life. So that's really part of the reason too, the character designs are so simple. But again, it's about also retaining charm. And, it's not trying to make the world's largest movie, but trying to make it large emotionally and enjoyable. So this is a big, big reveal here in the movie. If you're careful and you read the back of that paper, you'll get ahead of the story. And of course, this is the reveal of Lil Petey, and so important to the heart of this story. So Lil Petey, this is kind of like me doing Dogman. We had the editor's son, Lucas Hopkins, was doing the scratch for the kid because we just needed a kid voice. And then when we got around to casting it, we listened to a bunch of actors and things like that. And I go like, nobody's really better than Lucas. And it's really important that it maintains that little kid quality. It's just so charming and cute. And Dave Pilkey had requested, it was like, please don't use an adult to play that part. And when I did the Captain Underpants television show, I had kids doing those characters, and I just love the sound of it. And I think, there's a question. It's like, is a kid going to be able to deliver all that comedy stuff? And I go like, if they don't, they will make up for it times 10 with charm and likability. So Lil Petey is a really important character. And I think that Dave has said he kind of models Lil Petey after his mother. And in the sense that being incredibly positive and being encouraging and being, I always talk about little Petey as being like the truth mirror to these guys. And he's not smart and precocious. He just calls it like it is. He doesn't understand the world yet. And so it's just like in this moment here where he says, oh, I want to be miserable too. He has no idea what that really means. And it's just part of his charm as a character. So it's a big hinge point in the story because Petey now has a family and he didn't want one. Meanwhile, we've got Dogman who lost a family and does want one. All the design of these vehicles and stuff is just so fun. And again, if you look at like those pipes on there and stuff like that, you see like the paint strokes and the pencil lines, but it still has this reflective quality like it's made out of metal. And it just puts us in a really, really, really nice spot. And here's our gigantic city shot coming up right there. Beautiful, beautiful design and the lighting. And again, if you look at these buildings, the sort of crooked lines, the missing windows and all that sort of stuff is really a huge part of the charm here. I'm pulling in this Flippy story. In the books, Flippy kind of acts on his own, and it was important to get Petey involved in the villainy because basically what happens is that Flippy is sort of the monster who turns on him as the movie goes on. So there was a lot of stitching of great moments that Dave had come up with new things that I had come up with. This stuff with Petey and little Petey too is just kind of hilarious parental moments of having a kid, and then there's just some moment where you go like, I'm totally exasperated by this situation that Petey goes through. And I think, it's good to acknowledge parents and what they do. A lot of this stuff right here, all this silliness, was because I think in the first draft, we just sort of lost Dogman for, 12 minutes or something. So I wanted to come up with a little more extra story for him. And a lot of that is about the chief helping him search for Petey. And I love the sound of that drawer opening. It's just the little things. At one point, we had a very funny photograph, drawing of a photograph of the chief at his prom inside that box. But I said, it's too funny. And then all you do is look at that picture and you miss the entire joke, which is that he's got tiny binoculars. Dave was really, I'm going to say brave in going to some of the emotional places that he goes with the story because it seems so flip and silly. And then, here's this guy. I mean, he's giving away a cat on the street in one sense. On the other hand, he's abandoning his child. Right. So it's so great that he does that.
What's your name?
He doesn't have one.
Yes, I do. I'm little Petey. I think I'll call you Snowball.
This is Kate Micucci playing Dippy from Dippy's Donuts. We don't show Dippy's Donuts in the movie, but this character appears in a lot of the books. And Kate is another person that I've worked with a bunch in animation, and she's great. Coming up here with little Petey being alone. Another one of my favorite musical moments. Again, I like all the sad moments. I make up the funny ones and I like the sad ones. And this is like right from the book, these little shots right here where you go boop, 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 boop. Dave draws those things like that. And a lot of times in the books, there's really the layout and the timing of the comic panels that in the book are really great. Like he puts spaces in them and stuff like that. I wrote a whole song for this part, this section where little Petey sings, and I was just like, oh, it's just so much sadder if he just pulls that box around instead of going into a little musical number. Love this shot. So great. And then, now Dogman has this choice that he has to make. If he's just going to be the cop, or is he going to be the good guy who saves the little kid? This has always been a really nice sequence, and it just always feels really good and rich when you get into these more emotional spots. And we have so much crazy action that's coming up. Sometimes I'm watching the movie and I forget, and I go like, oh my gosh, we haven't even gotten to this part and that part and this part. And somehow I'm going to try and figure out what I'm going to say through all of it. So we're coming up to another really important part of this movie where Dogman meets little Petey. Right here. So here's a frame coming up. This is like right out of the books. The two of them standing there outside that coffee shop, and particularly a little bit later when the lights go off. But very fundamentally, the story is that, there's a cop and a criminal and they're adversaries. And then this little kid arrives and they both develop a relationship with this kid. Then the kid gets in trouble and they have to work together. I mean, that is the simplest version of this story. But there's such a crazy, crazy path that it takes as they walk along the path to get there. I love these shots of Dogman's house. And this is also, in the books that he goes inside his house and it's huge and has all these extra rooms. And, in the later books, he's got an elevator and a ballroom and lots of nutty stuff. The animation on little Petey is just so charming here. We're just so happy with the work that we got, that John led the team at Jellyfish and got all this done. Love this gag. It's kind of a two-parter. What does it mean that Dogman's reading a book? Oh, he's barking. Oh, no, he's barking at squirrels. Those drawings, I think, are pretty much what we had at the very beginning. I think we started to refine them, and I go like, no, just make them big and dumb. They're hilarious. And he loves his tennis ball. So those two guys are together. And now Petey, I mean, it's just kind of classic. He thinks he's free and he's sort of ignoring his emotions. Petey really has the big emotional story in this movie. And, he is a guy that, as we find out later in this movie, but also, in the books, that he just had a tough childhood and he's convinced himself that he's a bad guy. And then he kind of meets this kid and it's like, maybe you're not. Another beautiful music cue here. He blows it off right here. He's like, eh. But of course, little Petey wins him over. This sequence here, first of all, I love, if you have a dog, you're very familiar with this action right here because they can eat really fast. But this whole piano sequence that's coming up, we did a lot of versions of this. And it's really kind of inspired by, cats bashing on pianos and playing pianos. That's kind of where I started. And then Dogman comes in and plays. We did include one shot in the very beginning where you see Dogman playing piano. So that was my excuse for why Dogman can do this right now. And we called this, what's coming up here, the fun montage, which is basically the two of them bonding, and did many versions of it in a lot of different styles, and then kind of ended up with this single shot version, which doesn't seem too complicated, but it's pretty tricky to line all this stuff up and get it to work in CG because you're actually mixing a whole lot of different scenes. You can hear the bass drum coming in under the laser pointer palace there, which is something that's going to pay off later.
Oh, Dogman's got a friend.
And then here, this is another thing we really wanted to get into this scene is Dogman demonstrating compassion, basically, for someone who's kind of feeling low, which we see little Petey do with his dad pretty soon. And if you notice, from the beginning of the piano sequence to the end, that the house is completely decorated differently. In the beginning, there's still boxes around. And when we come back in, there are pillows and all this colorful stuff and, paper chains hanging and all this kind of stuff. And life has gotten good for Dogman now that he's made this friend. And that's the classic tale right there. The kid drawing, caring about them. That mug that's sitting there, I just noticed it like much later, and then I made a bunch of those mugs for the crew that Dogman has. I don't know what that book is. The squirrel's reading. You're going to have to find out. If you remember, Flippy went into the smokestack there, and these are two really great actors. That's Max Cook, who I worked with many times, and Janice Schmieding is playing Janet. And they find Flippy in there setting us up for the big action sequence to come. Again, all this stuff, the texture on this stuff is just so great. I always think of it sometimes like I've seen this, online where it's like, oh, is that a chainsaw? And then somebody cuts it open with a knife. No, it's a cake. And it's like, is that a bowling ball? No, it's a cake. And I kind of go like, oh, our whole movie looks like that. It's kind of great. Now we're introducing another super important character, ADHD. Kind of funny thing about this. So, Dave is well known for telling the story about how he has ADHD. And as a kid, it was like a problem for him. And so he calls this character 80-HD, ADHD. And when you read the books, that's the way you see it. You see 80-HD, and you don't maybe make the connection to ADHD. In the movie, we just were saying it, and everybody thought it was like, oh, it's the letters ADHD, and it kind of gave it away too fast. So I said, we got to show what his real name is, which is the 80-hexadroid droid formagon, or ADHD, and see it in text on the character, not to overplay the sort of idea of the ADHD. And then we're going to see that name come up again. So all the sort of stuff of Petey and of little Petey living there and crayons and drawings and kind of fun life, which is really why Dogman thinks he's succeeded in finding a family. There's ADHD, who wears flip-flops. And this bit with the flowers and stuff, I pulled this from a much later book, which is really a setup kind of for the end of the movie, because it's just such a rich emotional story that Petey has here.
Jeez, that Dogman's got you thinking the whole world is just rainbows and unicorns and lava.
Now we introduce the Squirrel Shooter 2000, which is, original to this movie, but certainly in the mode of Petey's inventions. This one we did so many drawings of the Squirrel Shooter, and they're all hilarious. But basically I said, I just want it to look like a squirrel hugging a log, basically is what it ended up being. And then he's got a nice little acorn hat on. Yeah, there's some classic dog activity right there. Whining and kicking legs. I love this scene here, just the scene of these two guys talking. And, this is some of this kind of comedy in this thing, too, is that, he tells little Petey about his troubles, about his dad. But then he says, I just want to help you. I want to support you and help you be mean and rotten like me. Got a little twist on it. It's so nice. The lighting is really super fun in this thing. And then you're going to see little Petey is basically getting his lesson from Petey coming up here. It was kind of fun when we put out the trailer originally. Little Petey was not in the first trailer. And a lot of the sort of comments we'd see were like, what? No little Petey? But people who really know the books paid attention and they said, wait a minute, Petey makes little Petey by using his whisker. And they noticed in the trailer that there was a time when he only had two whiskers on one side. So it confirmed for everybody, it's like, no, little Petey's in the movie. He's definitely in the movie. Some classic parent action right there. Dogman, we just want to keep that tennis ball alive. It's so important to him. The tennis ball obviously is like a representation of his old life, his old family, back when part of him was Greg. So this part that's coming up here, Petey talking about his father, little Petey getting the idea, let's go find him, is from a later book. And it was a lot of discussion about this part of the story. And I really, really wanted to keep it in. And it's just so rich. And I think, there's things that happen later in the story that we'll get to that I just felt like, I think I even wrote Dave an email and I was like, I can't believe you put this in the book. It's so amazing and unexpected. And he's very interested in having real things portrayed in life. So it's not that everything is candy-coated and perfect all the time. Love this kind of thing where the letters bounce off the windows. Just really fun things to do, that kind of stuff. All this text just looks so great. Again, high-end handmade. I think I've probably seen the movie like 40 times before I saw that thing said, call out, bark, bark, if you find little Petey. So I'm still finding things in the movie here. And then this was all, where would a cat go? And just trying to find the attitudes of a cat. Want to go to a yarn yard or where the mice are. I think maybe I had like a French cinema in there at one time, but it was a little abstract. And all of these are kind of setting some things up for later, too, all of these characters. This was a little tricky, too, just to figure out how to do this sort of wagon wheel bit here and have these guys spin out of control. The lighting inside this lab is just so tremendous. They did such a great job. So the whole art team that Nate Ragg led, bringing in this palette inside this lab, all the night stuff we have, it's not so typical that you would have a lot of, in something that seems like perhaps superficially like a young movie, that you would have so much darkness and nighttime and things like that. And of course, this is where we meet Grandpa, where Grandpa shows up, which little Petey thinks is such a great idea. Grandpa's played by Stephen Root, such a great actor, and I've worked with Stephen many, many times, so I was really happy to have him come in and do this. And, we spent some time making sure that there was also some humor in this thing. But in a way, it's an oddly real situation that's happening with Grandpa. So Petey basically has a dad who like doesn't appreciate him or approve of him. And it's just a tough thing that he's had in his life. It's a great moment right here. That moment is such an owie when it's like, yeah, I do know what it's like. And it's funny because people laugh when that happens when they're watching the movie. It's such a burn. It's so good. It's such a great moment. And also just the way that people aren't always aware of, you know, what they've put other people through and what's happening. So here's a big twist and introduction of Ricky Gervais as Flippy the Fish. It was really great to work with Ricky. And, you know, it's kind of funny because the very first time he came in, he's like, I'll do anything you want. I'm fine. I don't have any ego about this. And then he said the first line and I said, can you do it a little more energized? And he said, like, maybe I'm not the right guy for this on the very first line. And that lasted for about 5 seconds because he was fantastic. And he really got into it. And he loves that this character has an emotional arc, you know, this silly over the top fish. And now things start to get really big. So when I read the book, you know, these buildings come to life in the book and it's the big event, but it's not big like it is in the movie. And we really expanded on this and really had fun bringing these buildings to life and keeping the humor in it too. That's a steam vent, everybody. That's all that was. So basically what's going to happen here is his monster is going to turn on him eventually. And again, a lot of this stuff, you know, just kind of keeping that sort of intelligently silly alive. And I would say all this building stuff sort of falls under ridiculously cool because a lot of it is super cool and it is totally ridiculous. I really enjoy this scene a lot because there's sort of a lot happens. You know, Petey's on a sneaky mission. It has this interaction with his dad, this emotional interaction where his dad's driving him crazy, where little Petey says he loves Petey. And he's slowly getting through to him where he cares about this kid. And really the story ends up being that he wants to care about this kid. He doesn't want to be like his dad was to him. He wants to sort of break the chain, which becomes very clear at the end. And this love is something you do, just straight out of the books. Dave has this desire to basically encourage goodness, really. You know, little Petey is very often saying things like, you can't just be good, you got to do good. And being this undeniable force of positivity out in the world. It's funny, you know, you do all this complicated stuff and there's little simple things that always kind of bring you joy, including Petey snapping those goggles onto his face. Not to get too heavy, but in this scene here, where Sarah talks about losing her gerbil and she talks about you got to keep going. And I found that many times in a tough situation, it's the simplest and best advice to tell somebody. It's like, I don't have all the answers for you, but you know what? You just got to keep going and you got to put one foot in front of the other. And then she lost her gerbil. Colonel Kurtz. Okay, if you don't know who Colonel Kurtz is, most people don't. He's a character from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and also in the movie that was based on that. I generally find when that moment plays in the movie theater, I will always get one person. There'll always be one person who laughs at Colonel Kurtz. She's got her advice here about keeping going, which of course gets interrupted by Petey in this scene. Dogman, totally susceptible to squirrels in here. And, this really begins our sort of major action scene. I love Sarah getting tough in that moment. So, Flippy was programmed to say that do-gooder voice, the robot voice, is Karen Foster, our producer. Again, we just get this thing and you go like, that voice sounds great. Is there some reason we need to replace that? I don't think so. I think that's it. I think we got it. Here's our big drama shot. But look at all the squiggles in there and all of that sort of stuff. It's just such a cool texture. And again, I didn't make that up. I just sort of said what we want it to feel like. Cheesesteak Guy is a childhood friend of mine, Pierce Bunting, who is from Philly. So he knew exactly the Philly accent to throw in there for, yo, it's a cheesesteak. And that was like such an important thing. I mean, to be honest with you, I think there was a time in my career when I was like being lazy. And so I go like, I'm just going to tell you what I want it to feel like, and I'm going to let you figure it out. And then after a little while, I was like, this is the best way to do it. It's amazing because everybody's on the same page, and then they do better work than if I told them this is exactly how I want it to be. But it's more like, what do I want it to feel like? And, just on that topic, a lot of times we think about the audience and like, how will people like this? And it's very difficult to second guess the audience, what they're going to like and what they're not going to like. And especially when you get so deep into making something that, you don't know. I mean, it's like every beat in this movie I've seen like hundreds of times, and somebody's going to come to a theater and see it once or maybe watch it 5 times, whatever. But I can't try to guess what somebody is really going to like. But what I try to do is I try to think about, what do I like when I'm an audience member? And that becomes the separation for me between being a creative person, because there's all kinds of things that are easy, that are hard, that you love while you're making it, that don't mean anything to the audience because they're not necessarily on screen. Oh, this moment was super hard, or this moment was really easy. They don't have all that reference. They're just watching it. So I think about myself when I'm that person. Somebody goes to a movie and it's like somebody spent 5 years doing it, and they walk out of the movie theater and somebody says like, oh, I don't know, I didn't really like the mom. It's just so casual. But you have to put yourself in that position. What makes you happy when you're in the movie theater? What engages you? What do you like, right? And so it makes things a little harder for you, but I think it makes it more clear reference that you can separate from the creator if you think of yourself as an audience member. So you try to do that, and you go like, just think about it. It's like, what's the stuff you really love to see in a movie? What engages you? What grabs your heart? What makes you laugh? And respect your own opinion. A lot of times when you're making a movie, all kinds of people will say, I think it should be like this. I think it should be like that. And sometimes you give up your own idea to do somebody else's idea. And it's super frustrating when that idea doesn't work. It's like when your own idea doesn't work, you can live with it, but it's frustrating when you just give it up. This is just a very silly bit that I wanted to do in the model of like a 70s cop show. And I don't know where that came from. Again, it's one of those things when I'm writing and I go like, oh yeah, and then there's sort of a 70s cop show title sequence for no reason. Well, it's because they're teamed up. That's what it is. It's just a classic odd couple team up that's happening here. All for one, in color. And if you don't know, there was a time in television when not all TV shows were in color. And so it was a big fancy thing to say in color in the bottom is like, oh, this is really special. I'm old enough that we had a black and white TV, and I didn't know that The Wizard of Oz turned color halfway through, probably till I was much older. Again, Ricky just being deliciously evil here. And I can tell you this joke about the ticking clock comes directly from getting a note that said, shouldn't we have a ticking clock? And so I just had Flippy pull out that clock and said, I thought we needed a ticking clock. That's just me being cheeky. The beautiful mecha mailman. That would be his mustache that's opening is the idea there. And again, look at, this thing is so textured. It's so dinged up. It's just one of the things that I thought about a lot in this movie is what really makes it live and look great. It's not about making it perfect. It's about making it imperfect. It's like all the imperfections are really what bring life to so many of these things. If this robot was completely perfect, shiny everywhere, it would not have the same spirit and vibe that it does. And it's even true of people. It's sort of like what makes people interesting. It's like it's their imperfections, right? As long as you're accepting them. And this robot is such a great example of this. This was a big challenge for Scott Cullen, the layout guy, to figure out how to stage this fight in the city because these robots are so big. And we're getting some classic wrestling moves here, up against the ropes, swinging the old folding chair, getting to a suplex. So we created this park in the middle of the town. The reason the park is there is so we had some room to stage a big old fight with these guys. That's kind of part one of the fight. And then, gas is escaping. This is a huge expansion of what's in the book in terms of the buildings coming to life and what happens. And Petey gets away. Everybody gets a chance to shine in this action sequence. This is also one of these things. You look at the drawings when you're first doing them and you go like, that's pretty fun. That's cute. And then you make the models and you go like, oh, those look fun. That's the Nate Ragg T-Rex building he drew very early on in our process. In different shop. Laser Pointer Palace. There's George and Harold. Okay, so are George and Harold in this movie? Well, you just saw them right there, but I'm going to tell you, they actually appear in the movie multiple times. You're going to have to find them. They just are in this town. This is like my little miniature love story in the movie. In the books, the chief eventually actually marries somebody else, but I wrote this when that book came out. So in this time, he's getting friendly with Sarah.
Wow, my beautiful army, destroy!
You can see the radio building is Radio PLKY, Radio Pilkey. And this is just super fun action. And, when you get to the final animation and then you put in all of the sound and you put in all the lighting and it just gets bigger and bigger. And I kind of wanted this whole section to almost be a little overwhelming because it's exciting into movie theater when that happens. I don't want people to run away, but get close to it. Little classic bit there. Right into the chest. He gets impaled by the ice cream cone. And if you know, you know. Why is Grandpa measuring everything? Well, because you'll see. You can see that texture on that ADHD too. It's just so great. Same thing with all this robot stuff. It's just some classic sort of action movie moments that just have a little twist, like Petey's saying what he says right here.
I respect you, even if I'm only saying that for dramatic impact, and I'm actually still...
There's a title card like Dave has in the books. So when you're making this movie, you take all your storyboards and you put them in the editing machine, and you can watch the whole movie as drawings. And then, so the process we do is then we screen it, and then you go back in and work on it some more. And you get to do drafts of the movie. And then you find places, you get to do this in animation. You can't really do it in live action because it's too expensive to go reshoot all this stuff, but you can redraw things. And you get this chance to go back and fix things in the story and add things in the story. Like all of this stuff here was kind of later on, some of this action stuff and figuring out how they get out of this robot with hilarious results, by the way. Okay, I put that in, but I left it a little understated. I didn't go too far with it. And then little Petey comes in to save the day and then says, beautiful. But he's in over his head in this situation until this very moment. You know, again, when I just look at these things, there's so much stuff that is just like beyond kind of what I imagined at the beginning. And it's so much about having a good team and having good communication with the team. And I just still go back to that. How do you get people on the same page? And it's really tone. It's like, do you understand what the tone is? Like, how far do jokes go? How far does crazy action go? And you kind of create these, you know, a lot of times you hear it referred to as tune physics. You know, it's sort of like, if they walk off the side of a building, do they hang there for a while before they fall? Do they have bandages when they land? You know, these are like the worlds of animation that you determine early on. And then I think one of the other sort of things that makes a lot of this stuff work is that these characters take this all seriously. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it gets. They don't call it out. It's for real for them. And it just makes it more dramatic. And it also tends to make it funnier when they're, you know, they're not commenting, they're not looking at the camera, and just makes it hold together. Just kind of what I like to do. Intelligently silly. So now everybody's getting a chance, as the chief talks about, everybody's getting a chance to sort of be the hero in this moment. There's a little improvised lines here from Ricky Gervais. He improvised a lot of stuff, was very fun, and really got into it. Chief bails right there. Good job, Chief. Nothing left for us to do. Again, some of these moments are straight out of the books. Like, I think we made that up. But, the volcano, and it's just, I don't even know what to think of that anymore. It's like, why is there a volcano right outside of town? I have no idea. But for some reason, it just works perfectly and sets it up. And so many great drawings that were done deciding how these things look.
You're right, Dogman. There's always something you can do.
This sequence where these two go to save Petey, we did a lot of different versions of this. And there were some things like in the book, which is one of our sort of deleted scenes where Dogman has a motorcycle and a hang glider and chases after little Petey who's trying to save them. This is where she says all of them. And I think that actually kind of came out of a note, literally somebody going like, who's the hero? Because they keep switching. And I go like, well, I'm just going to have the chief ask Sarah who's the hero is. And she says, all of them, chief, all of them. Love this little showdown here, classic showdown. And here's another bit coming up, this aspect ratio squish with screen gets right here. So this is like a classic kind of, Western anime kind of thing. And then I was like, what if we made it smaller? Why don't we just go all the way? And I'm going to say, I've never seen that in a movie. So this scene coming up here with Lil Petey and Flippy is really important to me because, for one thing, this is where Ricky Gervais was like, oh, I like this. And it's because he loved the humanity of this moment, the sort of pathos of Flippy being worn down by this little kid by, saying, why? If you're a parent or anybody who's had to deal with somebody going like, why? It only takes about 5 whys until you're trying to explain the universe to a kid. It's sort of like, you can't go. Why? Because we have to stay home. Why? Because we have things to do. Why? Because we have to do them. Why? Because those are the rules. What? You lose it. But here's the thing I really love about this. How little Petey is defeating, effectively, the villain in this situation. And he's doing it 100% with compassion. And he's doing it by being kind. And the line that he says right before this, when he says, maybe you just need a friend, is huge. It's a huge thing. And I think it's huge for people who are misunderstood and people who are bullies sometimes and who've had a tough time. And the fact is, it's like, you know what? Maybe you just need a friend. And then he shows them this incredibly cute book and basically wins over Flippy simply with compassion, not by shooting with a cannon, not by doing any stuff like that, but by kind of flipping it and caring. Big moment for Dogman too, because this is his old life right here, and he's going to launch it. Another big moment for him. And he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, but he is willing to make that sacrifice. Love that tennis ball sound effect. We tried some other sort of hits, and I was like, no, it just needs to be a dumb, just like you hit a tennis ball. And now we head into really like the last 5 minutes of the movie here. And there's so much stuff that happens. It's amazing. I love it. Dogman is now faced with this idea. What was your job? Your job was to arrest Petey. That's what you were supposed to do. But things have changed. And I can tell you right there, that is a stunt butt. That is not on the chief at any other time in the movie. Just some silliness. Chief gets a little of something that he wanted at the very beginning. He gets a little recognition. Thank you. Why am I never on the front page, Sarah? As he says 70 minutes ago. So Dogman has this tough choice because now he's been working with this guy. He's got this relationship. He gets off the hook because he got pardoned by the governor. And I mean, this is kind of an interesting thing here because you might think this is the yippee yahoo, everything's great moment. But Petey stays true to character. He's stubborn. But he has developed his relationship with Lil Petey. And Dogman is the good guy. He gives it a little smile, but then you watch that smile drop when Little Petey walks. That joke is just because I always think about that in like superhero movies and stuff like that, that there's just big action movies, there's crazy destruction, and everybody's like, let's go get some ice cream. And this is a big moment where Grandpa steals everything. And this is the thing that I asked Dave about. I was like, I can't believe that you did that it's not just some cute little button up and everybody's groovy. And he said, that's just real. That just happens in life. And there's just some people that aren't necessarily going to be the way that you want them to be. And a lot of people can relate to that. It doesn't mean that things are bad, but it's a recognition of, kind of a real life situation. And it's amazing, though, that he got it into these books. And I was like, we got to do this. We got to do this. It's so rich. It's a big, big moment for Petey because his dad didn't change. And he's just talking about how people don't change. And then he's really has this realization that I don't want to be that guy.
We can't stay here.
You were right, Papa.
About what?
The world. It's nothing but...
So this whole moment is from a later book, but I was like, I want to tell this story. It's a great image, very much from the book. That line right there, huge motivator for me. I just want to say that out loud. It's an incredible piece of advice. It's like the world has a lot of problems. It could never be a horrible place because you're in it. And that works on bad days. It works on good days. It works in so many instances. And it's just so worth saying. The rough, which is the first thing that Dogman says to Little Petey when he gets him outside the coffee shop there. And Dogman, he's his own person. And I wanted Petey to get to this point that it's like he accepts his situation, he accepts his kid. He's not totally 100% changed, but he's a lot softer for sure. And I found this song and we put it in here and I tried other things and it was like, I don't know, it's just so perfect. It's great. So it's really kind of bringing this movie around into this very sweet spot here at the end, which is really kind of the richness that I love that Dave has in his books, and that the feeling that I get watching this part is something that I enjoy so much, you know, as a moviegoer. And a very simple message of like, it's going to be okay. That's my version of ending with a dance party. Very fun song here. Thanks for listening to me talking all about through this movie. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you got something out of it. And maybe we'll get to see another one. Thanks.